Hey, what's up, everybody? Looks like we're 1 o'clock Eastern time on the nose, so we'll kick things off on another live stream design from SolidWorks. So thank you very much for joining in. I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy to be hosting this round as we continue through our series of live designs streaming right here on YouTube. So before we get started, I'm happy we've already got a bunch of people in the room. Where's everybody from? I want you to throw in the chat, see where we got folks from. Are you in where I'm at in Minnesota, where we got about 6 inches of snow yesterday and last night, which is crazy? Or are you overseas? Let me know where you're coming at. I'd love to see the group that we coming in as we kind of get things started. My name is Mike Sandy. I work for SolidWorks for Dassault Systems. I'm a senior solutions consultant. I've been with the company for 5 years this November, which is crazy. And it's a fantastic place to work. Super cool technology. And we get to work with some of the greatest companies in the world in design and engineering, which I can't be more passionate about. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Eagan, just south of Minneapolis, and really spend a lot of time with our customers throughout North America, working pretty much on the design aspect, so within SolidWorks, and then I also get into a lot with rendering and visualize and the technical publications with SolidWorks Composer, so it's a lot of fun stuff there as well. But today, we're going to be focused on SolidWorks CAD, and I thought, since we're all kind of stuck at home, we're all being quarantined away from our offices, I wanted to go through a design that I put together for this live stream using functionality in SolidWorks that is phenomenal. And that's the Weldments tool. So if you're not familiar with Weldments, I'm happy you tuned in today. If you use Weldments a lot and you're a pro, I'm missing something or you have a tip, please use the chat. Throw in your ideas, throw in some of the thoughts or pro tips that you've got so we can engage the other group that's in there to learn, and we can just be a nice community on the chat dialogue and share your knowledge. That's what we're really here for. So for my design, when we started to look at going into this quarantine, I had this room that I'm in here, but it was pretty not workable. I had a kind of a cheap table with my laptop set up. And knowing that I was going to be working from home, I decided to spend the time and rebuild my desk. So I'll give you a quick virtual tour here and show you what we finished up. So here's my big L-shaped desk with my ultra-wide monitor. I've got my main monitor with SolidWorks, and this thing extends pretty much all the way across the room and really fills it up. And I put in some new shelving and some other things there as well. But I wanted to do it so I had a nice place to work, somewhere that was comfortable, where I could really lay out all of my stuff, have this capability, to be able to sit down, have multiple coffee mugs and so on. But I wanted to do it on a budget. So that meant having a plan going into my lumber yard, my Home Depot or whatever it might be, knowing exactly what tools I wanted or what materials I needed, be able to come home. And I also was on a tight schedule. I wanted to get this done as fast as possible. So I wanted to have an accurate cut list, right? I wanted to know quantities of lumber I needed, get home, unload it, make my cuts, put it together, set it up so I could be working. And I did it. It was about $100 in material, stain, fasteners, everything to put this together. I think it was less than that. And then I did it in about a day. So not bad. It was my plan. I was able to kick it off and do it all with SolidWorks. So let's jump over. Let's see if we've got the chat box engaged. Oh man, we got people from India, Germany, more India, Lithuania. Wow, all over the world. That's really awesome. Yeah, so keep the chat going. We got Ravi who's talking about some structures with weldments. We'll do some basic kind of weldment design. But what I want you guys to really focus on are some of the tips that you can carry into very complex design. The Weldments functionality is pretty simple for the most part, pretty simplistic in terms of what it can, the tools that are there, but really can expand above and beyond. And then as you guys finish this up, I urge you to take a look at our structure systems, which was new in SolidWorks 2019, and we've enhanced in 2020 for more of those elaborate structures. All right, so today what we've got here, kind of a breakdown of my process. We're gonna lay out the room, right? So when I went to do this design, I wanted to make sure I was accurately portraying the dimensions of this room. And I figured while I was doing it, I might as well have, a CAD model for this room, plus eventually the whole house. So as I do projects, I have that model I can always reference to. From there, we'll design out the desk. We'll do some 2D sketching and then start to use the Weldment tools. I'll introduce that. I wanted to talk a little bit about profiles. So we'll get into the profiles that are available right from the SOLIDWORKS unit interface, and also create your own custom profiles. A lot of times you want to be able to do stuff that maybe isn't off the shelf purchased. And then we'll get into finishing up the design. We'll create the cut list. And if we have time, I want to talk a little bit more about how I was actually able to trim this room out really quick too, to get a more accurate rendering. And now I have a full cut list for the trim in the room that I eventually want to replace. So hopefully that sounds good for you guys. Let's go ahead and dive into SOLIDWORKS. So I'm working in SOLIDWORKS 2020, and the weldment functionality, it's available in all versions. So we talk about like the standard, pro, and premium version. Don't worry, you've got it no matter what you're working in. And I'm going to start off with the downstairs office, and I just want to walk through. Now, you'll notice that I've got this little dialog box. One of my favorite pro tips when you're looking for files is just using the R on your keyboard, R for recent. And the recent document brings up this downstairs office. And I've got a few more complex examples that we'll get into. But let's open up the downstairs office design. And I'm just going to walk through what I did here. This is all pretty basic stuff, but for the newer users in the audience, this is basically how I was able to lay out the office space in, 5 minutes maybe. So I went through, grabbed pencil and paper, and I sketched out, the rough layout of the room using English unit. Sorry, guys. For architectural stuff, I always stick with English. Everything else, I stick with metric. But kind of just gave me the basic layout of the floor of the room. So once I had that, then I took out, just using a basic boss extrude, brought that to the height. Now I've got kind of a cinder block outing kind of around skirt of the main room. So that's where this represents, is up to that point. Another sketch here, you'll see that that's going to bring where that cinder block lays. It just kind of has a natural shelf built into the room itself. Another boss extrude, and we're pretty much there. Added a sketch in here for a window, but the nice one here, and what I want to point out, is the shell command. This is one of my favorite features. We can create these solid shapes and just shell it out. Now, if you're doing this and you want to start laying out your rooms in your house, maybe your office, just make sure to shell it outward, not inward. In the shell property itself, if you go ahead and edit this, you have the option to shell outward. You want to do that, otherwise you're not going to account for that measurement wall to wall. You'll run into some inaccuracies. So I created the shell. Go ahead and turn off these sketches. And then basically just a few more features, and we had my room to work with. Now again, the reason I did it as a single part here is I wanted to create an assembly, which is where I'm going to start, and then use an in-context approach for the actual desk design. I could use this as a single part to be able to generate a multi-body part to pull those out. But I thought for the workflow of being able to detail out, adding in like the monitors, adding in shelving, anything downstream, made more sense to be able to have a master part as the room, and then we'll use in-context design approach to be able to build the desk. So let's start off with a new assembly. I'm going to go ahead and drop this right into make assembly from part, or you can also do that using, let's go ahead and just do make assembly from part. And again, we're working with IPS. So this will bring that in. And here's a little tip. If you didn't know, if you click in space when I'm creating a new assembly, this actually places that part where you're clicking. In this case, since we're using everything referenced to a shared coordinate system, so we want the top, front, and right plane to be all referenced in the same spot, I'm just going to click the check mark. All right. What this does, it actually locates that office into the same exact location. So if we look at the origin there, that little blue dot, we've got the origin here. They're right on the same spot, 0, 0, 0. And we'll use this same origin for anything that I do in this design. So if I go and add something later on, I can use this in-context approach, make the design, and I don't have to worry about mates necessarily as we start to lay out the office space. Now, it's just the way that I'm going at it. There's multiple ways you could do. You could do a top or a bottom up approach where you design the desk separately and insert this and made it into place. But I kind of wanted to see this organically unfold as we were designing the desk. So that's why I chose the top down or in context approach to it. So once we have that, I'm going to go ahead and insert a new part to it. And this is going to be my desk. Now, same thing. We'll go ahead and click the new part. And instead of clicking anywhere in place, I'm just going to reference the front plane. And what this will do is, again, establish that same coordinate location. So the new part has the same coordinate location as the assembly, which is the same as the room. So we're all in the same central space, and I don't have to worry about, mating these up or anything. Everything will kind of unfold. What you'll notice if we expand out the tree on the left-hand side, and let me zoom in a little bit here, is right now it's just got a generic name, and it's referencing that it's in this assembly. This is actually telling me that this is a virtual part, which is super cool. If you're not familiar with virtual parts, check it out in the help files, get on YouTube later, call your reseller, however you want to do it. I'll touch on it here, but they're really powerful ways that you can actually create a part and save it inside of the assembly. Now, they do have the pros and cons, just like anything in SOLIDWORKS. But the big pro here is that we're going to start there, and then I can actually remove that out, have it as an external part, save that into a same folder, different folder location, and then it becomes reusable in other designs. And we can move it back and forth. We can recreate that virtual if need be. So yeah, check out virtual parts if you're not familiar with them. Super cool functionality that I didn't know about until using the software for a few years. A coworker had shown me, and I thought that was pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is actually give this part a name. So right click, you can rename the part right from the feature manager tree, and we'll just call this my desk design. Let's see if I can spell. And we'll go ahead and select out here. And that you'll see again, it's still giving me this desk design, but referencing that it's in this assembly, which I don't want. At this point, what I do want to do is take and actually save the part out and make this as an external component. It's going to reference that shared folder location that I'm currently working in. You can change the path if you needed to. In this case, that works. Let's go and give it a different name because we've already got a test part in there. Desk design 2, whatever. All right, now we'll save that out. So again, right click, save part in external file, click the OK. And now what we see is this looks like just a regular part that you would see in your tree. Now I can start to work in this mode. Now I'm actively sketching, which I don't need to be right now. So let's go ahead and exit out of the sketch. And let's come in here. Excuse me, I'm going to mute my computer monitor. You guys don't need to hear that at all. There we go. So I've got the active sketch, and this is what I'm going to use as the part that's going to house all my weldment functionality. So let's go through and do a few things. Now, again, I'm shared coordinate locations, everything, all the planes are nicely layered right on top of each other, which makes my life a lot easier as a designer. I'm going to come in and actually create a plane on this part that's going to reference the height of my desk. So what I'll do is just use the plane tool. And then if I come into this top plane, we can actually see that the top plane is referenced on the floor of my office. So easy enough. I can set that, and I've already got it at 29 inches, which I went through and sat in my chair and kind of figured out like what makes the most sense. Where's my posture relative to my office chair? And those are kind of what drove that 29. Depending on your height, up or down a little bit, but 30 inches seems to be kind of the industry standard for ergonomics on desk height. A little fun fact. I went a little bit shorter because I'm not that tall. So we'll do that right in there, and that builds it in. Now let me go back because I missed something, and I wanted to point this out. Now I'm working in context of the assembly, meaning that I can reference other features of the assembly building this design. As I do that, whether it's a sketch or in that case, I created a plane. It's off of the top plane of that part. But if I did it of another plane or even selected on here, that creates an active reference, meaning my new part, the desk design, is looking at the office space to be able to figure out where that location is. And this can be great, or again, this can be not so great. It really depends on the design intent that you have as a designer engineer. What you can do, and here's a really nice trick, is up on the top as you're working and editing in these assemblies, is there's a button, this no external references, and you can turn that on. And what I'm telling SOLIDWORKS, I'm just saying, hey, even if I reference something else, don't make the connection. Don't actively save that reference in there because I don't maybe want it. Maybe, I guess the room probably won't ever change unless we knock down the house and build a new one. But, maybe you're worried that might change and modify your design. Those types of things can make an effect. So you can just globally turn that off with this super handy button. And I generally work in this format. But if you turn it off, and I'll show you an example here in a minute of what that'll actually do. So I've got my plane. Let's go normal 2, and let's actually start to sketch out kind of roughly where this desk is going to lie in the room. So again, I've got the room, which is nice because I really needed to figure out, is this thing going to be too big? Is it going to be, gargantuous, or is it too small? And I also had some constraints in terms of the closet door that I wanted to make sure. So again, just referencing this little sketch dialog, we can start to lay out some of the known dimensions that I have. Now, I'm going to be using the S key as we go through. So if you're not familiar with this, easy enough. S key on your keyboard will bring up your shortcuts, and it's context sensitive. So right now, I could create an extrude, a new plane, and so on. But what I'll do is reference that plane I just created, and we'll generate out a new sketch. The S key now becomes relative to sketch tools that I use often. And you can customize this as well. Just to right click and hit that customize and drag in any other features or, sketch items that you use. You can just pull that into your S key dialog box, and it's right there. The thing too is if you're like me and you have a lot of buttons on your mouse, you can program these generally. I know that Logitech has a nice little programmable interface. You can program like the S key onto the thumb, which I think by default is like scrolling for web pages. Super handy to be able to pull that up, and brings it right in. All right, so got my sketch up here. I'm gonna go ahead and just start kind of laying out the basics of my shape. Now what I did is I knew I was gonna build essentially 2 boxes that would frame out the major components of the desk. So I'm just gonna start with that. And we can create some relationships here to automatically snap to that relationship. Makes sense, I'm going to be using this. And we can start to derive some of the basic dimensions. Now in this room, I am constrained by a door over back behind me that my wife reminded me multiple times, don't forget about having to open the door because all of our wrapping paper's in there, I think. She wanted to make sure to get to that, obviously. So that dimension there was 80 inches. And that's the total dimension that I could max out on my desk. And again, I'm going for the biggest I can, extended to the wall, still giving closet door some space. Now up here, I also wanted to go to be as economical in time and money as I could. So I went to just a 10-foot long standard pieces of 2x4 to build out the bottom box. So I just said, hey, what does 120 inches give me? Gave me enough room at the end to put in a file cabinet down the road if need be, build in additional shelving. But that way I'm saving cuts. I can build the box based on that 120. And this is just that stock lumber size. What I didn't know was this dimension here. I wasn't sure how long I wanted it to be. And this is where SOLIDWORKS was really handy in terms of being able to design it out and get a feel and actually virtually start placing monitors in the assembly and say, you know what? This was big enough, that wasn't big enough. But where I started off was about 25 inches was my guess. And I think I stole this from the IKEA table that was in here earlier. I said, what is that? Let's just see what that looks like. We're going to drive that to 25 inches. Now I'm going to create a relationship. These are both going to be equal in length. I can do this 2 ways. Just using the control select and grab the 2 and set that make equal relationship. Or if you're fairly new to SOLIDWORKS, you can also really easily create equations. So in this case, we're going to plop in another value here. And I'm just going to say, I don't want to manually put it in, just put in equals and then click the dimension that I want it to be driven off of. So no matter if that changes here, it'll update as well. So that's going to be equal to, the naming convention here is it's the 3rd dimension I added in the 2nd sketch I created. So if you ever wonder what that D3 at sketch 2 is, third dimension I added in the second sketch that I've created. So go ahead and click the OK. You'll get a nice little Sigma symbol. And really what that's highlighting is that we are driving that from equation. So from the user's perspective, I can see, all right, this is intelligent. It's being pushed off of another equation or an equation itself, and you can take a look at that. So that's pretty much the knowns that I had with this table for the layout. Now what I want to show you is that even though I'm still editing this in the assembly, I can still reference those points and kind of snap it into place. And you'll see that it's all blue, meaning that it's still undefined. This sketch can float in space around there. We want to make sure that doesn't happen when we're building it up. I like to fully define my sketches. I think most users, that's common practice. So if I disable this no external references and we move that away and do that one more time, you'll notice that now it's fully defined right in place. So it's referencing that other part, the office that I built, and now it knows where it is in space relative to that office. So again, if we blew out a wall and stretched this or whatever it might be, that would now possibly modify the sketch that I created or the position of it. So just keep that in mind when you're working in this type of a design from a top-down approach, that if we create these relationships to other parts, if they change, they can update. So just be aware. So again, I'm going to disable that. Let's just back up one little bit. We'll disable the relationship. And so far, this looks good. Now, let's see what we got going on in the chat. Hope you guys are having fun. And again, if you see anything, or I'm sketching or I'm working through this that you want to add, please share in the chat dialogue. Looks like I got some of my coworkers in here. So thanks, guys. Too Tall Toby, the celebrity, if you guys were able to watch the first episode of his mug, phenomenal job. Thanks for joining. Loves the S key, A++. Shout out to you as well. We had Brian Zayas a couple of weeks ago who followed Toby on Friday, did a really cool monitor arm design. So check out the recording of that. All of the live SOLIDWORKS are recorded. You can go to the SOLIDWORKS channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, so you get the updates when new content's available. I believe last Friday, Mike Sabocek, who's legendary in the CAD community. Mike did an awesome rack and pinion design on one of his hot rods. And then Andy Barnes, I got to give him a shout out as well. Last Monday, did some surfacing tools. So a week ago on a waxing iron. So if you're not familiar with surfacing, want to get more involved with that, extremely powerful tools to know in SOLIDWORKS. Check out Andy's video. It was one of my favorites. They're all my favorites. I love them all. Which gives me, I want to give a shout out to next Friday. Whatever you're doing, clear your schedule and make sure to tune in for Mark Schneider. He's the man, the myth, the legend when it comes to CAD. Arguably one of the most influential guys on SOLIDWORKS. He's been around forever. Has really helped shape the software. So tune in as he goes through some of the Model Mania challenges. And again, that's this coming Friday. Cool. All right. Totally off rail there, but I wanted to give a shout out to some of the folks that are in the chat. So thanks, guys, for coming in. All right. So where was I? All right. So I've got my layout sketch done. Now at this point, I could continue to work inside of the assembly. We're going to back up and actually go to that part. Here's another little pro tip I love. The D key inside of here. The D key gives you a few options like breadcrumbs, but it also lets you back out and accept when you're editing in context. So you'll notice if I hit D key, I can get that little, let's go one more step. I'm no longer editing in the context of the assembly, and I'm just back at the assembly level. Another thing I'm going to do too is because we're working in this shared coordinate system, I know everything is right on that origin. I'm going to fix this location. Don't have to worry about the mates. This is all going to come together just kind of with this technique of design. So let's open this up and we'll start laying out my desk. And this is going to get into some of the weldment structures. So here, that plane one, again, this is going to be based off of 29 inches from the floor, which is the top plane. And this was all done from the initial design. And we can start to edit and modify my sketch. Now, it is still free in space. So first thing I'm going to do is just give this fully defined dimensions here. So let's set that at a distance to the back wall to the origin. And these don't really matter. It's just making sure this thing doesn't go flying off on me. And we'll do that at 69 inches there. And just like that, we've got my fully defined sketch. I know it because it's all black lines put in here, and we can start to add a few more things. What I want to do is add in a couple cross members because this thing is pretty long, 10 feet. And so I'm going to give a center line there. And I think back in, what was it, 2017, we can now inference the center point of a sketch, which is really handy. So I'm going to go ahead and just create 2 center lines there. And then this probably smaller box on the side, I think is fine. And actually, in full transparency, I added these and then I ended up having to move them when I installed the desk because the support lined up with the studs in the wall, and I wanted to make sure that they're supported there. It made it a little bit easier without having to put a support piece of wood down to create that bracket. Ideally, what I would have done is modeled in the studs as well, and I'll probably go back and do that, so I would have been accurate right up front, but for the design, for the sake of this, let's just go ahead and put these at about the halfway point. Now I use a click, double click to draw my line. So 1, 2, and then double click to end it. The other alternative to that as well is you can just use a click hold to be able to draw that line. And when you release, it no longer creates that connecting section. So another little sketch pro tip for you. Now let's go ahead and just add in some more dimensions. And I'm going to give this from the end right to where this is at. Easy math, 120 divided by 30. By 4 is going to be 30, but we can also, again, just add in that equation. So the equal signs, we'll do at 120, just give that division, divide by 4, and that's going to give it some intelligence. And we'll do that one more time. Again, I'm using my mouse gestures, pretty quick if you don't see it, to grab that smart dimension tool, activate it, and let's go ahead and just grab it here, and we'll add in, we could do it relative to that other one, or same thing, 120 divided by 40. And this is just building in some design intent. So if we did have an update downstream, maybe this was, we decided to go to 140, those are going to stay nicely positioned, right? They're always going to be at a quarter set. The middle one I don't have to worry about because it's snapped to that center point. So my vertical supports are there. Super cool, super easy to do. And again, just building in some intelligence into the model. All right, so 120 looks good. Now at this point, we're done sketching. This whole model for all of the pieces of wood that go into it, I don't have to create any more sketches. So let's go ahead and exit out of here and I'll introduce Weldments. Let me jump over and I just want to see, do we have any questions coming in from the group, from the audience? I may have missed some stuff. Let me know if you guys have coming in. And again, if you see a question, someone asks it, you know the answer, feel free to answer. You guys have a dialogue, have a discussion in the chat. That's what it's all about. All right, cool. So looking back here, let's go ahead and actually look for the Weldments tool. And if you are in SOLIDWORKS and you don't see Weldments, there's a lot of functionality that may or may not be turned on, or I guess visible in terms of these tabs. Previous versions didn't have this little tabs kind of arrow over. In 2020, you can hit this and you can enable a lot of default functionality. All versions have it. Things like sheet metal, that's super popular. I really love direct editing tools. I use these all the time, even though I know a few coworkers, Mark Johnson for one, that hates them, but great to have enabled. And the Weldments, this is where we're going to talk about today. So if you don't see it, don't worry, you have it, it's there. So enable it, again, just by right-clicking, tabs, and you can find the Weldment tools. And there's other stuff, play around, dive into mold tools. If you want to learn more about molds, there's that. There's also the tutorials to follow along, and obviously the SOLIDWORKS training. Now, these don't have a lot to it. There's 3D Sketch, which we'll get into maybe a little bit, but really this is a 2D layout for Weldments. I don't have to worry about that. Things like structural members and so on. But really what Weldments does is as soon as I enable this to turn on the Weldment functionality, it just adds this into the feature at the top of the tree. Now, this is going to tell every downstream feature to don't do that merge, right? We want to create a multi-body design for this whole thing, so no parts are ever merged together. Keep that in mind because you can use that functionality if you're using like a master model multi-body approach. Maybe, 3 cylinders and you always want those to be not merged. Just enable Weldments, turn it on, And it just by default takes away that merge result when you're creating an extrude. Super cool little pro tip. Really awesome for that master modeling, single part, multi-body design technique. Now I've got Weldments on, and that's going to enable that. And this also gives me now the ability to start creating some structural members. And this is kind of the main beauty of Weldments tool. Now you'll notice in my library, and your library will be somewhat similar, is I've got some custom cross sections in here. I've got like 80-20 that I've added in on my own. And we've got some other standards like ANSI inch, ANSI metric. I gotta get a drink of water here. 1 second, guy. Lovely. We can add to this, and I'll show you how real quick. But in this case, let's just grab one for fun. ANSI inch. And what I see in my dropdown is a huge list of all the, the standard ANSI inch, like pipe. Let's do schedule 40 pipe. And I can grab all sorts of different pipe diameters, like 3 inch. And from there, this gives me the ability to start to just select on my sketch, and the Weldments tool will create that extrusion automatically for me. Just fires it in, good to go. I can come back, change these. Maybe we want to go to a bigger size, rebuilds that for me, fires in the new dimensions. Super cool. So you'll see as we go through and build up my desk, once the sketch is done, it's just click, 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 and go. Now, if you don't have all of those profiles available, let me point this out. Over on the task pane flyout on the right-hand side, whoa, that went way big. You'll see that there's a SOLIDWORKS content folder. You can actually extend this out and click the Weldments folder. And these are links to zip files. So if you don't have the full ANSI inch, ANSI metric, whatever it might be, you can just come in, control, select, and it'll download those for you. Where you want to put them, you can always figure that out in your system settings. So if you ever wonder, like, where is it pulling all of this stuff? You know, I don't know where to save it. You can come back to system settings, and there's a file locations. So we can come into this options halfway down. And in here, you got everything, right? This is kind of the database of all your file references, and you'll have the Weldment profiles. You can add multiple locations, and it'll look at those locations and pull those in. Me, I personally, and I don't know if I should recommend this or not, but I used a shared location on Google Drive, so all my devices will sync. We have other ways to do that as well, but it's worked well for me. As I customize, I can always reference those at the same location. So now that I've got those downloaded, you guys know where that's at. Again, design library under that SOLIDWORKS content in the Weldments folder. Control click, and you'll be able to download the full profiles, save those locations, and you can get up and running. What I'm working with today, though, is softwoods. So 2x4, 2x6, and so on. And if you've done any woodworking, you know that 2x4, it's not actually a 2x4. All of those sizes is 1.5 by, 1.5 by 1 3/4, whatever. They're smaller. So you need to be aware of that when you're going into a design like this. If I were to sketch it up and do 2x4 of everything and actually build it, it's not going to come together. So doing that and having the profiles, you can find softwoods configurations right on 3D Content Central. Or if you want to, we can actually build our own custom. So let's go through, and I want to show you guys really quick how you can create your own profile, because it's super simple. And this gets into, if you know, the softwoods, that's downloadable. We have that on 3D Content Central. But like 80-20, or if you have some really crazy profile extrusions that you're using, maybe some plastic extrusions that's specific to your company, you would create the profile just like you'd start with a part and just generate out the sketch. So all I did, created a new part, and I'm just going to do a generic rectangle for the sake of the webinar. Maybe this is going to be a solid extrusion. We'll go ahead and add in a couple of fillets here. Fire those in just to round the corners off a little bit. Let's give it some dimensions. Let's call this 1 inch. And all I'm doing is I'm just creating a base profile, and I'll configure this to all the sizes that are available. And we'll do a 1/2 inch. That looks better. This radius, let's do that equation. I love using equations. So this is always going to be a percentage of a length in this case. Maybe not. We're making it up. And let's just say you're going to be 10% of the width. So that'll drive that radius design. Now I've got the basic profile laid out. The next thing you want to do is just add in any points that you might want to reference in case you want to move how that profile is. Earlier I did the extrusion of just a scheduled 40 pipe and it went in the center. It's pretty ideal. But as we do with 2x4 and 2x6s, you may want to snap to a different edge, and we'll get into that in a minute. So just simply come in using your point tool, and you can just add in as many of these points as you'd like. Don't go too crazy though. You don't need to. Just where you might want to reposition that if need be. And I like doing those at the center line. So that's it. That's my new profile. There's just a few more steps to do. One thing we can do is start to create a bunch of different sizes. I love to use a table. Let's exit the sketch first to drive these. So I'm going to insert a new design table. Here we've got that design table option. If you guys aren't aware of this, again, it's insert tables, design table, and the auto create functionality. What I'm doing here is creating multiple configurations of this so we can choose from those sizes. I'm going to auto create, and it's going to extract out the dimensions that we just created. So in this case, I've got dimension 1, which was that height, width, and I don't need that radius because that was an equation. So we'll just bring those in. Cool, that looks good. Now we can come through. Actually, let's go back. I did want to do, I'll show you that one more time because I want to auto create and grab the right dimensions. We'll grab everything. So insert, table, design table, the auto create functionality. We'll pull in the dimensions for you. Let's grab all three so I can get the right length, width, height. Here you can see that equation driven, but let's just go up by 1 and maybe let's go up by a quarter on these. No big deal. Oops, my number lock off. Something's going on. Keyboard. So 2. Not sure. I can't put numbers in. What's going on? Let's edit the table. This is nice. If you do really complex tables, when I right click to edit the table, you can edit that in a new window. It opens up just like Excel does versus in the interface. So if you're spending a lot of time here, open it up in a new window and then you'll have it just like standard windows. So let's do this at 0.75 and good old SOLIDWORKS functionality or Excel. We'll just pull this down. Naming, I don't have to get too involved here, but this is nice. You can use like the concatenate function if you're not familiar. This just extracts some text. So let's say rectangular extrusion, and let's give this a space. We'll say 2 inches, and we'll say by. You guys can look up concatenate if you don't know how to work these equations. And let's do another space here. And finally, we'll do that final value in D4. Oh, this is a good point because it won't work. So I added in the function. You notice it's not working. Not surprised. For some reason, when you create these Excel tables, SolidWorks and Excel, when they generate this, they create it as like a text cell. That needs to be just a general. So change the cell file type or type over to general if it's not working. And this is getting a little much. Let's try one more time. Concatenate. I thought I copied that. And again, let's just do that quote rectangular extrusion, comma, and we'll say this value, comma, by, comma, this value. Close that up. There we go. I needed some spaces, but you get the idea. And that'll actually name those configurations for me. So I've got a nice reference to do it. And I wanted to show that because spend the time, put the names in there. That's what you'll be accessing when you go to the dropdown. Cool, and that's it. We're done. SolidWorks will use that design table. It's going to generate out all of these configurations for me to select through. The last part is just to save it. So I'm going to come in. Let's just rebuild my sketch. I'm going to select on the sketch that I want to use, File, Save As, and then we're going to fire this into that shared Weldments folder. But we change the file type to a library feature part, or libfeat parts, the extension .sldflp. Once you have this, so we'll come in here. I always put this in my Weldments. I've got a custom folder. We'll just do this as test, save it. Now let's go back into where we're at with our desk design. And you'll see my structural members. Again, we're enabling that. This gets me into my library. I've got a custom folder. We got my test configured. All those configurations are available. And now I can just click and it's going to generate out that extrusion, that rectangular extrusion for me. And that's it. That's how you can create your own custom profiles. You probably, majority, you won't have to because you can download these all from the library. 3D Content Central has all of the configured softwoods. But like 80/20 or really advanced architectural type extrusions for window frames and so on, you can grab those profiles and generate your own library. So I wanted to hit on that because it's important. But now let's get into the fun part. Let's start laying out our desk. So for this one, again, going back to structural member, or from your S key, I've customized mine to include it. We can start to grab those profiles. And here we've got standard wood, and I'm going to use on this one I use just 2x4 for the main box frames, and we'll pin this down. And here all I have to do is just start clicking right onto the sketch that I created earlier, and just like that it starts to create our profiles, lays them out. Now I want to go vertical with these, no big deal. I can come down in the properties and we can just switch this to a 90-degree profile. Let's go back. I hit enter too quick there. We'll just edit that. And let's spin this around 90 degrees. There we go. We'll zoom in a little bit. We also want to make sure that this is along the wall. So by default, it's using that center point of the rectangle for the extrusion. We locate the profile and I can just click what I want. And in this case, we know the top of the desk is going to be there. We'll select it and good to go. Now, good woodworking, we'll probably want to use the two longer portions. We'll just do a single cut at the same length. Again, I wanted to simplify the manufacturing process of this. Have a simple cut list, same length. And in this case, I want to modify the actual end conditions of these. Here you can see that we have them aligned, the corner treatment, but I want to have the end pieces to be inside of the front and back pieces. So what you can do is just select on the little node here, and that allows me to override the treatment. 1 second here, guys. Let me go. Let's see, locked up my profile. That's new. There it is. Other screen. So I usually work over on this monitor. So the dialog box came up. In this case, I've selected on that profile. It's highlighted the yellow. It's just saying, how do you want these two beams to connect? And you can just change that. Just right in there, it's just going to say how we're going to change the end condition. That looks good. Let's do it one more time for here. I want these outer beams to be longer, and just like that, we're good to go. Now, there are a few rules to be aware of. It's got to be connecting, and they've got to be perpendicular. So if they're not connecting or perpendicular, you won't be able to generate it. Like this one here, I've created a chain. I'll have to create a new group. So no big deal. New group, still using the same profile shape, 2x4. We'll click here. Let's go ahead and flip that location 90 degrees. And again, my keypad doesn't work for some reason. Try it again. So go to that group 2, switch that to 90. We'll find that profile and we'll just lock that right in the center there. That's it. So what we're doing, and the reason this is so brilliant, so amazing for this type of design, is in the back end is we're creating a cut list. So what SOLIDWORKS does is it actually looks at all the like bodies that I've generated, and it's monitoring that by quantity. So when I go to make my purchase, I know I need 2 at this length, 4 at this length, and so on. All just back end, gather it up into a cut list or bill of materials, essentially, all specific to the wood. So let's fire through a little bit more and we'll create some more structural members, and we're going to do it for the second box and we'll go a little bit faster. So again, let's grab all the way around, boom, boom, there and there, and we've got our box. The reason this is laid flat is the way that we've designed the profile. So again, it's using the same planes. Generally, if you're doing like a vertical structure, these will come in nice and clean, but super easy to fire these profiles over. And again, we'll just make sure we're working so it's flush against the wall. Just going to check my corner treatment here. We'll change these up. So that's the other way. We want this to be full length. Looks good. How about this one? Change that as well. When we get into some of the trim, you'll be able to see it's pretty simple to do. We can do mitered corners as well. And there's our second box. The new items have been added into my cut list. So I've got 5 of those main cross sections. You get home, 5 of those on the chop saw, throw those in the pile, we can start building. Now we'll go through and let's do, one more. I just got to throw in these members here. So we'll just do the three profiles to join the middle. And let's locate that profile at center. And so the top is there. And here we go. So this case, I actually didn't create a new group in the feature. I created a new feature and it gave an overlap, which we all know can't build that unless there's some sort of advanced woodworking skill, which I'm not going to worry about. What I'm going to do is just trim this up. But pretty much the only thing I've used so far, 2D sketch, I've used my structural members, looked at the profiles, but using library profiles. Now I want to use this trim extend tool, and this thing is super powerful. What this does is what it sounds like. I'm going to say, I want to trim up these bodies that are all overlapping, and I want to use these bodies to make those cuts. So it's going to knock off that material, just doing a Boolean operation. Ask me if I want to keep or discard any of these. These are all I want to keep. Click the OK. And now we've got nice, even connections on our lumber. Sizes are up to date. And again, on the cut list, we see over here, we've got 8 of those cross sections. So now I've got a quantity I need to know I need to purchase and cut for. All right, we're almost done with the main layout. Let's go ahead and do the top. And this is where it got interesting in the design aspect of creating my desk, because I wasn't sure the depth, nor was I sure if I wanted to use like a 1x8, 1x6, 1x10, 1x12, whatever. And I did a little calculation on cost too. And this did come out to be not much more, but was one of the cheaper options. I think the 1x4 was the cheapest option. It was pretty much a flush. So what I'll do is just come through here and we're going to change that over to a 1x10 profile in that softwood configured. And then using the same sketch, let's just generate out a single piece. That's going to lay that all the way down to the end. We'll find that profile and we'll make sure that's flush against the wall and flush against the top. And there's my full extension. Now what I wanted to do though is I actually wanted to extend this out a little bit further on the edge and the front. So let's create a pattern first. Let's finish the top. I could create multiple sketches to do the same thing we've been doing, but all the standard features in SOLIDWORKS work great. So linear pattern. We'll give this to a direction here. We're not going to use a feature. This is actually a body to pattern. And what is that? 9.25 inches is actual what a 1x10 is. So we'll do 9.25. We'll use the body option. This is key. Remember, we're working with bodies, not features. And we'll select that out and we'll do 3. All right. So right there, that's where we're running into a bit of a problem. I may not want that much overlap, but I'm not going to worry about it quite yet. And I do want to have an extension here. So without going back into my sketch and extending it out and doing a bunch of work that I should have thought of earlier, we'll revert back to that super awesome weldment tools of the trim extend. Remember, it says extend in here. And I'm just going to create a simple reference plane. We'll set this at maybe 1 inch. I don't know. This is going to just tell it where we want it to go. And I can use the trim extend. I could do it before I did the pattern, or in this case, we'll do it to all these bodies. And we're going to say a face or plane to extend to. Bam, just like that. Just going to extend those out, update the cut list to the appropriate size, and then we'll remember that we wanted 120 inches, so it's probably not a good idea, and I ended up not doing that, but for the sake of the video, we're live. Let's go ahead and just extend that out, and that's how easy it is to modify from an existing sketch. Trim, extend, super powerful tool inside of Weldments. Let's go one more just to finish up the desk, but before we do so, I don't want to get too far ahead. Let's actually look at the assembly and see how it's coming along. See, this is so cool. Now that I'm working inside of here, we can start to look into my office from a sky view and see if it actually makes sense. Does it look bulky? Does it look too big? This is pretty much where I got to, and I was like, I really like it. I think it's going to work great. Threw this into eDrawings, brought it upstairs to the wife, let her look at it. She said, yep, go for it. I agree. So we got the buy-off from the boss, the 3D model, and we continued on the design before we actually built it. So just like that, using these in-context relations and building this virtually up, I can start to see this thing really come to life. Of course, I love to render, so we have to go into my material database. Let's edit the material, and we'll just give this, we'll give this some wood. So woods, I used a cedar, it's cheap. Apply it, applies the property. Let's go back and just see how cool it looks in our office. There we go, much better. Okay, so coming back down, kind of repeating the same steps as we saw before. I'm just gonna create my structure member, grab that line. We're already defaulting, that's a sticky feature, the 1x10, so last used. Let's set my profile location to this edge, click the OK. Right away, we see we've got some overlap issues, and again, we'd probably want to extend this out. Trim extend, we're gonna say, let's trim this body with this body, all right? And then we could create the plane just like we did before to extend it out. Reference geometry plane. We'll set that here, 1 inch, looks good. And I'll do this as 2 commands. You could actually do it as 1, the trim extend. Let's do that, why not? So let's move that plane. I'm gonna come back to the trim extend, edit, and let's go ahead. Oh, we have to do it as 2, sorry, because it's a body, face body. So we'll add in 1 more trim extend. Say, let's pull this guy out to this face. Gives me a nice little overlap. And we'll do a little bit different than last time where I did the pattern first. You guys, when you're creating patterns, you can always grab an edge to define or a normal to face. In this case, we'll just say normal to face. Make sure you're selecting bodies. If you ever get a failure, that's probably why. All right, cool. So there's my desk. The last thing I want to do is just modify this because I think that's too much overlap. Easy enough. Come back to that initial sketch, and we can just say from 25, let's pull this out to maybe, I don't know, 30. That's gonna be way too much material. I'm just using instant 2D or instant 3D to be able to pull out that value. And let's go back 28. All right, let's see what that looks like. Still too much. I forget what I ended up using. I should measure real quick. We can also manually enter 27 inches. And we'll go ahead and rebuild. Cool, that's what we want. Just a little bit of an overlap coming off of here. And that is pretty much the desk design. So going in, let's save this, make sure we're up to date. We can make a quick drawing for this. I don't need to detail out all the dimensions necessarily because I'm really just getting the cut list. That's the main focus for me to go to the lumber yard, be able to pull this all in. So we can bring in a view, generate this. Maybe we'll go a little higher. I like having a little color to it so we know what it is. Scale, what is that? 1:18. Sure. So we know what we're talking about. And then from there, we're just going to do a table. And instead of a bill of materials, we'll use that cut list table. Grab that view. Okay. And check that out. Now we've got our call outs. We know what lumber to buy. We know how long to buy it. And we know the quantity. Now, the one thing we can't necessarily do here is what they call nesting. So, I've got, for instance, 8 pieces of 24-inch or 2-foot long 2x4 pieces that I want to buy. What's the best way to do it? There are some Excel tables you can generate that. There are very advanced nesting tools, but just be aware you can export this into Excel and run that through like a script that will tell you, here's a fast way. Here's what you should buy. 1 piece of 10 and break that up, or so on. I guess it'd be 2 8s would probably be the best. But either way, I've got an accurate cut list to grab and go forward. Now, I want to point out one last thing here, and then I'll show you our final design in a trimmed room, is as you're working in here inside of the Weldments tool, you may notice that the Weldments configurations has 2 derived configurations, or derived configuration that's created when you enable that weldment option. One is the as machined and one is as welded. Now you can use these as the as welded is going to be basically all your stock material. And then as we do the as machined, you can add in additional features to it. So I put a bunch of holes all along the back board for cabling of this. That would change the properties of that board and pull it from the cut list. Don't need that. So having multiple configurations lets me manage those little features and make sure SOLIDWORKS knows that these are all the same board. We just have a downstream operation. So if you're wondering what that's all about, you've got configurations for adding those chamfers or, a router bit if you're going to run it, or holes like I did, and so on. Man, JP, yep, I see you're on here. JP Emanuel, a master woodworker himself, who's going to critique me on my woodworking skills. Pretty basic here, but again, I wanted it to be cheap. I wanted to be efficient on building it, and I've got it now. The last thing I did is when I actually built this, we came through, built the 2 boxes, brought those in, mounted to the studs in the wall, and I just put in 45s, which required moving the supports a little bit so they align. Didn't design that up. That was just scrap wood for the most part. Threw those into my model and I was ready to go. So simple, easy process there to get it mounted into the room. Stained it, sanded it way down first, brought them in, stained it within the room, and then I just used some screws because I didn't have a trim gun. I need more tools, but for the most part, that was the process of my desk. The design itself, I think, took me maybe 20 minutes, not even, and iterating through the fit, the feel, the function, the length, the hangover, and I did add some trim. So on the front end of this, we went through and did some 1x4s in the front, and I did some chamfers to the edges to be able to make it a little bit prettier than just standard 2x4. And this is just common wood, which is like a cedar, I believe, that I use. So again, inexpensive, cheap. So let's, we've got 1 minute here. I'm going to just check to see questions, but I also want to go through, this was a simple Weldments example, something that you guys could walk through if you're brand new to SOLIDWORKS, brand new to Weldments. Great place to start. What is something you want to build? Maybe a closet or a desk, 2D sketching for it. You can get into much more advanced Weldments. So here's an example of a project I worked on with a company to help them out, where they do architectural trim with like windows and glass for commercial buildings. And we actually created a huge library of their suppliers' cross sections. There's like 3 or 4 cross sections that all modularly fit together. These are aluminum extrusions, and we use the Weldment tool to be able to generate these out. So if you look inside, we can do a little section view here. This is pretty cool. Super complex. Let's go into that. Yeah, there we go. This is how like windows are held together, and there's, you know, seals that go in here and fasteners and everything. But this is just a shared coordinate within the weldment profile itself, and we'll just extrude it right out. Another great example, weldment functionality, you know, doing things like staircases. If you want to up your weldment game, try designing out a staircase. And this is going to utilize more 3D sketching, which I didn't talk about today. 3D, you can actually sketch in 3D space in SolidWorks, which is a super powerful functionality. And then if you're a Weldments pro in the room and everything I showed you is boring, I apologize, but I challenge you to check out the structure systems. That was new last year in SolidWorks 2019, kind of really upping the game of the complexity that you can create, getting into, you know, bigger structure type systems to build those out. So hey, that's my time. Thanks guys so much for tuning in. Remember, this Friday, don't miss it. We got Mark Schneider, the man, the myth, the legend, who's going to be doing all of the, or going back on some of the Model Mania parts. So this, he knows SolidWorks inside and out. I'm tuning in. I'll be there for sure. And stay tuned for future versions of these. We're going to continue to do the live design series. Tell your friends, tell your coworkers, share these, tell your mom. I think my mom joined today. Hi, Mom. So yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate your time. Let's just check any other questions. We got some lot going on here. Sorry if I missed your questions, guys. Limited in the chat view, a lot coming through. All right. See you guys Friday. Thanks very much.